Welcome to another PR Tech Wednesdays, the live weekly webinar where we deep dive into the latest PR tech solutions and ever-evolving best practices. I'm your host, Eric Schwartzman. If it's Wednesday, it's PR Tech Wednesdays. This episode of PR Tech Wednesdays is sponsored by the Electronic Freedom Foundation, which has been defending civil liberties in the digital world since 1990. EFF champions user privacy, free expression, and innovation through impact litigation, policy analysis, grassroots activism, and technology development. And they have all kinds of free tools that can help you maintain your personal privacy. So for more information, head on over to ericschwartzman.com/EFF. The bookstagram of the week is The Mom Test, recommended to me by Eric Sue. He's the partner of Neil Patel. And this is a great book if you're looking to ask customer questions and not lead them to giving you the answers you want them to give you. So it's a short book, quick read, and I would highly recommend it. So my guest today is Jonny Bentwood. He's the global head of data and analytics at Golin. Jonny, welcome to PR Tech Wednesdays.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
By the way, if anyone has questions, send as many as you like in the chat window, and we'll definitely try to squeeze those in as we go. Jonny, you spent 10 years at Edelman, where you rose to the rank of CIO. 7 of those years were in the past decade. During the last decade, companies traded on the U.S. stock market grew 200% versus 50% for the rest of the world combined. How did all this growth impact your career?
I like to think I'm finally at the wonderful stage in my career where it's the best time to be in data. Because when I first got into this gig, nobody really knew what it was all about. And then suddenly, data suddenly became a currency. The Netflix started talking about it being more valuable than oil. And yet, as I progressed in my career, people started to realize that gut feel wasn't good enough. Now, all these companies that were spending millions of dollars on marketing and public relations and advertising, they wanted to make sure it was working. And as their growth expanded, they got more serious about showing the return on what they're doing, making sure that the work that was done was the right job to be done. And so as their growth continued, people became more interested in proving and validating it via the use of data and allowing data to inform what should be done. So, to put it bluntly, it's the perfect time to be in the data kind of job as I am, as with the growth of the economy, the growth of these companies aligned with that technology growth has enabled me to be the job I'm doing now.
In his book, Blitzscaling, Reid Hoffman writes about how the business priorities of fast-growing companies change based on their growth stage. And he uses this progression to describe those growth phases: family, tribe, village, city, state, and nation. When you're hiring someone for your team, how important is growth stage experience?
That's a fascinating question. I suppose the way that Golin look at hiring people is different to the way traditional PR companies look at it. Now, don't get me wrong, understanding that growth stage is important, but for me, we try to look at things in a slightly different route, because in a world where everyone has become more generalist, trying to cover a myriad of different areas, to be part of that tribe, as you call it, where everyone knows how to do so many different disciplines, I'm looking to hire specialists. Now, Golin are great believers in what we call the G4 model. It's not just one person due to their seniority who knows everything. We want people who are specialised in certain areas, who can collaborate. So whether you're a great creative, whether you're a great data scientist, whether you're someone who knows all the media and influencers, or whether you know the specialist area of your client. I'm more focused on hiring people who are specialists. I'm more interested in those people who have got this desire to learn, never to accept things because that's the way it's always been done. Al Golin, who set up this company via his work with McDonald's, he said, fix it before it breaks. And that's the kind of ethos I like. It's not someone who tries to say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm always looking to continuously improve. So whereas you gave that mantra about the different stages of family all the way through to nation, I'm looking for a more evolved stage of thinking about how can we continuously improve.
So when you are hiring someone for your team and you're looking for a specialist, how do you tend to find them?
Well, I suppose there's a few character traits I'm looking for. The first one, I'm a specialist within tech and within the data side of things. So I want to make sure on a junior level, they have the ability to tell me what things mean. The simple thing is, I want to look, if somebody presents me with something, if I find it interesting, it's no good. What I want to find it is being useful. So I set that as a test for my future for people who could work in my team. I send them information, say, tell me what's going on here, research this subject and tell me what I need to know. And if they just hide behind charts and graphs, they're not right for me. I want to have someone who tells me what it means and then what we should do about it. It's the difference between being interesting and being useful. If I do this podcast with you now and you say, well, that was a very interesting chat, I'd be really upset. I want it to be a useful chat. And that's one of the main things I'm looking for when employing people.
So if you were to say recruit from a university, from a top school, what department at that university would you recruit from?
So it's a really interesting question, that, because my views have changed. Historically, I used to think it has to be someone who has proven that they can go to a university and study any discipline, provided they have the ability to stick at something and get a good results. In that atmosphere when they could be spending all their money and time getting drunk or having great parties all the time, if they can follow through and get it done, that would be good enough for me if they got a good mark. My views have changed, actually. I'm now looking for someone who has proven that they can research something. I'm looking for people who've got those skills. And unfortunately, it used to be that universities were just there to help people have a grasp of the real world about learning. But now I want them to have better skills when they come into the work for me. I want them to be able to do research. I want them to be able to have a really core strength of using data technology and analytic products. I want their second languages to be able to write Boolean. I want skills where people can create algorithms. I don't want people where I have to train them up from scratch about how things are if they've already meant to have those skills. So I'm looking for someone who have got a love of communicating with people and understanding the approach that takes. I'd strongly love, my ideal hiring people are analysts, people who specialize in PR, marketing, business studies, economics, library science, or all the different areas I've hired from in the past.
Understanding that, of course, there are some exceptional public relations programs at the university level. As a baseline, just sort of in higher ed, would you tend to expect someone coming out of PR to have more of the skills that you need, or someone coming more out of a technical program where they were, had some familiarity with coding?
I can teach people to code, but what is harder is to teach people the importance of what public relations is. So I'd always go down the PR specialist route first, always. Having that skills without having to try and explain what is earned media versus paid media. I want those skills. There's so many people who are after jobs at the moment, and when everyone's coming to me equally, if they've got or if they're standing one step above the other person because they've chosen this as a career, they've chosen it within higher education, they're already in a better place.
So at Golin, you're serving a particular type of client. And I imagine they're primarily enterprise clients. So when it comes to serving the needs of enterprise clients, how do the needs of companies that have been around for decades differ from companies that became dominant players over the last decade?
Well, let's just compare a couple of my clients at the moment. We've got Walmart on one hand and McDonald's. Those are two great clients. They've been around for a long time. And then you've got companies who are more in the disruptive space. I work with a company called Water Wipes who have a unique take on creating baby wipes for kids. It's a very pure form with no chemicals. Now, historically, those traditional companies, they've got lots of legacy things going on. They have got huge amounts of ways they've done things in the past. And often what we need to do is to get them to challenge their operating system, challenge the way they work, challenge the way that they can think differently. And whereas the new companies, they're far more open to innovation. Now, Walmart and McDonald's are the exceptions because they're completely with it. But I have worked with other companies where it's really hard to get them to think differently. And when you can get them to actually say, I know you've done it this way for 20 years, 30 years, but now let's have a look how we could challenge that model. The world is changing. If you want to stay competitive, then we need to adapt with it.
We're talking to Jonny Bentwood. He's the global head of data and analytics at Golin. I want to show you something, to share something with you. I'm going to put something up on the screen here. Can you see my screen?
I can indeed.
So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
I love Maslow.
And for those of you who haven't seen it, the basic idea is that you have certain needs that have to be fulfilled in a certain order. So your physiological needs, you have to eat, you need a place to sleep, right? That's sort of the primary need to solve. Once that's mostly solved, then you're worried about your safety. Once that's mostly solved, then you're concerned with love and belonging, and next up from there is esteem, and then at the top, self-actualization. How can you be a better person? How can you reach your potential? And so the idea is it's tough to get somebody to focus on reaching their potential if their physiological needs aren't met. So I want to share with you a hierarchy of strategic communications needs that I put together. And so the way this works, right? Actually, let me just kind of right. Startups have different needs than change-ups who are pivoting, and they have different needs than scale-ups who have found a product market fit and are now growing their customer base. And of course, they have different needs than those that make it to the grown-up phase, who are focusing on looking at data to improve the customer journey and looking at something like the emerging field of revenue operations to align metrics from marketing, sales, and customer service. And the primary introduction of media channels, starting with owned, creating your own presence online, then sharing that presence through social networks, then earned, traditional media relations, public relations, influencer relations, and then at the top, when you can afford it, advertising. What are the needs of the CEO and the COO and the CFO in these growth stages, and how do they differ from the needs of in-house PR?
So I think it's quite an interesting graphic you've got there talking about the needs. I would probably see it more as flatter, but let's just focus on your question. One of the main problems I've noticed is that PR people want to have a seat at the table with the C-suite, and inherently they speak with their CMO, and they're talking to them about key terms like message pull-through, share of voice, and yet when they talk to the CMO, they're not getting anywhere. The CMO talks for CEO, EO, and the CFO, and it doesn't go anywhere. because they're all talking a different language. Now let's think about things from a different person of the C-suite. If you ask the CEO what they want, it largely comes down to two things. The biggest thing is sales, and the second thing is around margin. And we've done research to prove that if you're going to get involved with the language of the CEO, that's what it's about. I'm not saying there aren't other issues around reputation and stakeholders and a myriad of other factors, but primarily they're after those two areas, but focusing foremost on sales. So can you imagine a conversation between the CMO and the CEO when the CMO is saying, good news, we've got great message pull through. And the CEO goes, well, does that mean sales? They're talking a different language. And what about the CFO? The CFO, they're after margin. They're looking at operating costs. They're looking after paying their employees. They're looking after making sure that their finances are in order. Again, the CMO goes up to them and says, good news, our share of voice is this. And they go, well, does that mean we're making money? So we've got the problem that marketing and public relations has is they're talking a different language. And if you're talking about this hierarchy of strategic communication needs, what we need to do is get everybody talking the same language. Now, we've all got the same goal. We all want to be successful. So how do we do that? And the way I propose to do it is by changing the narrative. As a PR person, I would say this, but the narrative that you need to do is a language that everyone understands and fits across all their goals. And that is by focusing on the customer journey. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to spend a couple of minutes discussing that. So the Aberdeen Group, an analyst house, said that by focusing on the customer journey, and thank you for showing a map of it here, it actually increases efficacy by 50%. In other words, you do more with less. Now, for what it's worth, I disagree completely with how you have aligned different things in the customer journey map. Because some of these things, for example, you've got PR as an awareness metric. Well, actually, PR can do every single stage in the customer journey, from awareness through to consideration. I then talk about attitude, then purchase, then advocacy. So we talk about it slightly differently, but the concept remains the same. Now, understanding that 50% increase in efficacy, what you are going to be telling the CFO is that if all of us are doing the same campaign, if all of us are focusing on the same objective, then we're going to do more with less. Then you're going to make the CFO happy. Now, let's talk about the CEO. We want them to increase sales. Now, if it wants to increase sales, then you need to, that's on the purchase side of things. I would normally see this as the fourth step. But in order to increase purchase intent, you need to get the other areas right first. You need to drive awareness. You need to make sure that when they are considering you over your competitors, that the feature functionality of your product is better or perceived better than the others. Then on attitude, people like and agree with what you say. Then you've got to give them an action to buy the product and then to evangelize it. Now, if we measure each individual step within that customer journey, we can plot how a company performs relative to its competitors and then see where the gap is. And if we know the gap is strong and big in one area, that's where the focus of our campaign should be. Now, I say that because if we wanted to increase sales, but we spend all our time focusing on awareness, but there's not an awareness problem, then we're doing the wrong job. For example, if I wanted to increase awareness, I may speak to one of the Kardashians, massive reach. But if we've already got massive reach, it's a waste of time. If I need to change someone's opinion, then I want to focus on attitude, so I'll be working with niche audiences who are far more trusted. So we need to do different tactics compared to where we are on the stage of the customer journey. And if we do that appropriately, we're going to be more impactful in making sales. And now the CEO is happy. So we measure each of these different stages to see where the gap is and focus our activities based on that to say what the job that needs to be done is. And PR is not just awareness. It can do every single stage within the customer journey.
In your essay, Tracking the Customer Journey, which ran in the USC Annenberg Center for PR 2020 Relevance Report, you wrote about the mapping exercise that calculates the gap between a product brand and that of its competitors. Can you give us some examples of how this exercise informs a PR campaign?
Certainly. I'll give you a couple of examples, and I'm deliberately going to try and move away from the obvious bit in the awareness space. There is one well-known company who are a fast-moving consumer good, we call them FMCG in the UK, who their entire marketing team internally, they got their bonus based on impressions. And so they did loads of things to drive awareness. They sponsored stuff, they did loads of advertising, and everyone knew about them. So when we look about 150 metrics at each stage of that customer journey, and when we saw where they were, their awareness was through the charts. But when it came to measuring their consideration, again, measuring around 150 different metrics, it dropped to very low numbers indeed. And that told us the tactic that we need to do is all based around consideration. So it informs the strategy that we need to make. So let's give a few examples of it. There is I talked before about water wipes. Now, one of the things that they've got is they have poor awareness in the market. So for them, we needed to create a sustained campaign that would drive niche audiences talking about their products. And the thing is, because we're doing it this way, it helps measure the success. And we can do this across earned, owned, and paid media. And the whole benefit of this approach is it stops us all doing random activities. Too many marketing teams are just spending money doing lots of different stuff. The social team may do one thing, the ad team may do another, the people looking after their social handles or their own website are doing different things. This approach focuses everybody to do exactly the same objective. And when we try to do this with one of our clients, their market share increased by 12% in 3 months. Now, before then, they said, no, we don't believe in this customer journey malarkey. Let's just focus on sales. So we did an in-store promotion. And you know what? When they did that in-store promotion, which is just on purchase, their market share jumped by 12%. But as soon as that in-store promotion finished, it dropped, it went right back down to below previous numbers because that campaign didn't have sustained ability to maintain what was going on. So what they needed to do is follow the customer journey, focus where the gap was, and do the most appropriate work.
Can you build an accurate customer journey map for a company if you don't have access to their analytics?
This is one of the biggest problems I've had over the past 20 years. I always ask my clients, can you give me your data? Give me your sales data. If you can't give me it, can you give me a trend line? Can you give me your Salesforce number saying how many people are coming to you and inquiring about you? And I think over the past 5 years, maybe 3 companies have said, sure, here you go. So the question came then, what can you do if you don't get that data? And this is where it's wonderful to be in 2020, where there are so many different data sources that act as a proxy for what you can get. So not only can we measure the customer journey for our clients, we can also measure the customer journey for our competitors as well. So I could have a look, Carlsberg is one of my clients, I can have a look at Budweiser and Stella and Peroni, and we can compare them against each other using the same metrics. Because quite often, what you're doing, you need to be relative to your competitors, so you can get it. And I'll give you a few examples of how you can get this data. First of all, you may want to have a look at I use Google Trends quite a bit to understand as a proxy, as a result of us doing things, are people going into Google and searching for our company? That's a great way of doing it. I look at search information to have a look at click-through rates. I use a tool by SimilarWeb to understand how much people are actually going to individuals' websites. There are thousands of tools out there beyond the basic ones. A lot of them are free, and you can get this information to understand the customer journey. Now, I would never just rely on one metric to prove purchase intent. But if I can have another 149 different metrics that all point in the same direction around purchase intent, that gives me a level of confidence to know the score is accurate. But what I also do is weight things differently. For example, in awareness, I may look at reach. But if it's reach amongst my target audience, I talked about Kardashians before. Well, if my audience don't care about what Kardashian has to say, who cares how big their reach is? But if it actually hits my audience, then great. And if it's a focused article around my audience that's being discussed or message, as opposed to just being mentioned in passing, then even better. So you could weight things accordingly as well.
What are some of your favorite PR tech solutions out there today?
So I've got a data stack that fits in about 5 different areas. And I think they're great. So I'll talk a little bit about the data stack. Mine largely comes down to the first area being listening technology. Now, for listening technology, there are a bunch of different vendors out there. My first bit of advice is never go for a company that only does social listening, because my clients and the customers don't say, well, this is social and this is traditional media, or this is one thing or the other. I want something that looks at everything. In my opinion, I find TalkWalker the best of the platforms out there. So that's for listening, and that would cover all traditional and all social together. The second area I would look at comes around visual intelligence. Now, for visual intelligence, it's how you get information and visualize what it means in a simple way. I do a lot of this for clustering. And what I mean by clustering is if there's different subjects that people are talking about, how critical is one of those subjects at the focal point of what everything else is being discussed? Again, I like to see where that important area is. So for that, I quite like using a company called Quid and a company called Flourish for visualization of that. And then I want to understand my audience. Now, to understand the audience, if I'm trying to build a profile of my customer, so I'm saying, okay, so they're 19 to 24. They may be male or they may be female. They may like this, watching this TV show. They like doing this. They read this journals. They follow these influencers. If I can understand who they are and where they go to get that information, I've got a better chance of engaging with them. So for that, I use a couple of products. I use Global Web Index and ComScore. I also want to test messaging. Now, this is where I fall foul of a lot of people in my industry. Loads of people do test messaging by doing surveys. And I love surveys. But I have found there's a bunch of professional survey takers. And I can't stand that approach. And these are the people, you send out a YouGov survey or an omnibus survey, and the same people are filling in the stuff. And I don't know how reliable it is. Recently, I've been working with a company called Sticky Beak. They're based in New Zealand. And they take advantage of the Facebook API. So let's say, Eric, you are on Facebook, you have expressed an interest in liking dogs. Me too. I've got 4 dogs for what it's worth. And let's say I'm doing something for dog food. Now, historically, I would do a panel and it would go to thousands of people. And one of the qualifying questions would be, do you have a dog? Would you like dogs? And if you say yes, then your survey counts. Well, my view is that's ridiculous because I could have a lot of false positives. This way, I use the Facebook API to look at which people are part of groups or have shown an interest of people who like dogs, or specific areas in healthcare, or specific interests, no matter how niche. In Facebook, like in Reddit for that matter, there's always these groups. And I can target those specific groups anonymously, and they can fulfill surveys, and they can get rewarded with money or by giving money to charities, and I get better results that way. And that way I can test one message or another message. Which one is going to be better? This visual or that visual? I can refine things in real time. And the final area within my data stack is around engagement. Now, for engagement, this is when a company wants to care, showing their customer care. Now, this is more important than ever. Historically, the way that companies did their care is they did things in a linear basis. You get in a queue by what you tweeted or Instagram or whatever you engage with the client on their social media platform, and they'd work through it in a line. Well, that's bonkers, because some messages are more important than others. Let me give you an example. Let's say I'm in the queue at Walmart, and I write a message. The queues are bloody massive in Walmart. If I'm there now, and I'm following care, I can say, hang on a second, go to checkout 14, we're going to open it for you. Or, where are the avocados? They're in aisle 12. If we can engage with people in the right time, when an issue is important to them, as opposed to in the linear fashion, we have a direct impact on changing their Net Promoter Score. So we need to change the way that we show engagement with people to go beyond this linear method of first in, first out, to be able to actually take it to time-based location and location-based. So we focus also on what is being said. So we work with companies like Sprinkler and Chorus to actually bring in complex rule-based workflow to look at engagement and then engage directly with our customers. So those are the 6 parts of our data stack.
That was gold. If you're on this webinar and you heard that, you are lucky. That was huge. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, in his book, Outside Insight, Meltwater CEO Jorn Ligeson writes a veritable manifesto about the importance of gut-checking internal data against external data. And he calls this analysis of external data outside insight, since you get competitive insights from external data. And specifically, he recommends monitoring these 4 things. 1, strength of brand. 2, client satisfaction. 3, online ad spend. 4, hiring activity against his key competitors. What are your thoughts on those 4 metrics? Do you use them, or do you use something else?
I think we need to be flexible. I don't think there's one rule that fits all. So it's going to be quite a quick answer. There's so much data out there. I think there's a way to actually apply what you can get in different areas. If you don't mind, Eric, I'm going to share with your audience. It's a way to share my screen, because I'm going to give everyone a bit of a treat.
Perhaps if you hover over the bottom of the screen, do you get an icon on the far right of 2 screens with a line through them? Click on that. Yeah,
Can
there
you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so we talked before about the different tools out there. Now, the problem that a lot of people will have is to say, well, that's all well and good. I can't spend $1 million getting all those tools. So what I've prepared for everyone is a list of free tools that do exactly the same. And here we go.
Wow.
So for those people who can't do all the stuff, who can't pay for all those different products I just said, there's loads of stuff out there that's free.
Fabulous. Well, all of you on the call, you can screenshot it, or you'll be getting an email with the replay. And I'll go ahead and screenshot this, and I'll make this the thumbnail for the video on YouTube, so that it'll be easy to find. Thank you so much for that.
It did make me realize I forgot to mention the other part of my stack, which is identifying influencers. I use 2 wonderful products. One is Creator IQ, which is very much harvesting data, and the other one is Analytica, which is far more curated.
Have you checked out Tracker?
Okay, so this is the question you just asked. We could replace with any number of 50 different solutions.
Could we?
There is always a shiny toy.
Okay.
There's always a new product. There is always someone that says, can it do this? My request of everyone who's in a similar position to me, make a decision for a product that does 80% of what you want it to do. And then ignore everybody who says, what about this? Be confident with it. Otherwise, you're going to spend your entire time fighting, well, this one does this thing. Do the job that does the majority of what you need to do. Otherwise, you could, if you're a company, have hundreds of different vendors you're working with, you have no procurement leverage, you have contracts which overlap or redundant. Stick to the core products. And by all means, have a time in your procurement cycle when you review other products and get everyone to engage with that. But be careful of the person. I'm sorry, like you just said, Eric, like, have you heard about this? It is very disruptive, and sometimes just got to say, this is what we've gone for. We've evaluated it, and this is what hits our market the best. So to answer your question, I have heard of Tracker. I think it's great. I think the ones that we use are better.
So let's circle back to the comment you made about monitoring. You know, this idea that, you know, you can't just get a social tool. You need a tool that does social. You need a tool that does mainstream. I imagine you need a tool that does broadcast as well. What are the top 3 questions a client should ask a media monitoring company before they sign on for their service?
Before they ask the media monitoring company, they need to ask themselves some questions. The first question is, what do I need versus what do I want? Because the media monitoring company will always say, oh yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that. Let me give you an example. You just mentioned broadcast. Do you really need to monitor broadcast, or is that just cool to have? Because from my experience, everything that is in broadcast is pretty much online anyway. Not just niche areas that aren't, but do you really need to spend an extra 24K a year? Because that's how much it could cost. Secondly, you need to be thinking, who's going to be doing the setup? Do you have a team of scientists, data analysts who can write Boolean, who can do it themselves? Or are you going to be relying on them to do it? Third, what about the reporting? Do you want automated reports, or are you going to be doing that yourself? A lot of the automated reports are very pretty, but do they show value? There's a company called Coverage Book that does a great job of providing automated reports to help people out. But when it comes to media monitoring companies, the most important things I look for are, how good is the content? Does it capture as much as we need? If it doesn't, can it capture more? Does it do social and traditional, or just social? Does it provide analytics? Does it have historic data? Can I bring in third-party data like Google Analytics? Can I monitor my own Facebook Insights pages? Does it have translate? Does it have image recognition? Does it have the ability to understand KPIs around engagement? Does it have the ability to understand the virality of what's going on, how information spreads across different channels or different countries? You see, it's not just about can it listen. Loads of companies all have the same APIs. So I'm more interested in the partnership with the people I'm working on to see how they can support me. I also throw in a few hygiene factor questions, as you would say with Maslow. I would ask them questions to trip them up, to see if the salesperson is messing me around. I would ask about Instagram data as a great way of doing that. Instagram changes their API frequently. It's notoriously difficult to get information. So I'd ask them to what extent they can get it. And if they say, oh yeah, we can get all of Instagram data, I know one of two things. They're either acting illegally or they're lying. I have a company who approached me and said they can capture everything. And you know what? They can, because they harvest it all and they're doing it illegally, which means I can get it all, but I'm managing my clients' expectations that this will be the normal until they get turned off, and then I'm in a bad place. Or the alternative situation, they can't, and it's a salesperson who doesn't know what their product can do. So there's certain things like that. I also like to try and understand how complex the Boolean is. What I mean by Boolean is the search term. And because a lot of time when you do these listening tools, you're getting a lot of false positives. So if you can actually have a system that enables you to write really complex Boolean beyond the and, ors, or nots to get down to really high degree of definition of what you're looking for, then it's going to save my time in the long run. I'd also look at whether they've got an AI layer to look at relevance or sentiment. So all these different areas, but this is just the tip of the iceberg when we're trying to identify which listing provider to go with.
So a couple of follow-ups on that. Are you seeing AI creep in to replace a Boolean?
I'm only really seeing AI come in with regard to looking at scoring sentiment, to be able to figure out what's been done in the past after a bit of training to learn what is positive, negative, or neutral, and also to understand relevance. So let's say Apple is one of my clients. It learns whether I'm talking about Apple the company or Apple the record label or Apple the fruits and so on. And that's where I'm seeing AI. I'm not yet seeing it as much in the other areas. It's really largely based around contextual learning of like what words, phrases are relevant or looking at their emotional context.
In terms of back to the media monitoring, if there was a client that was specifically interested in news media monitoring and they really need depth there, and they're concerned about truncation, they're concerned about images and captions perhaps not coming through, they're concerned maybe about not getting a good representation of the footprint or reach of a syndicated hit in terms of how wide that would go. Perhaps they're concerned about premium content. They really want mainstream news media. What would some of the questions you would ask a provider to try to get a sense of maybe who's got, the best data there?
There's a few problems that everyone has, so I'd be interested to see how they would tackle it. What do you do about paywall access? Stuff like the New York Times. Can you capture that information? Can you look at least the title to see if things are being covered? What about, if that's paywall content, what about password protected content? Can you get that stuff as well? You don't need to pay, but you need to actually sign up to get through and look at the content. Those are the two main areas that I'm having the difficulty. Then I'd like to have a look at how they calculate their metrics. So different companies look at reach in different ways. Now, I should caveat this by saying, when we talk about impressions, that is a ridiculously stupid metric. I would never go near, because it implies that just because the New York Times online readership, the Daily Mail readership is 20 million, doesn't mean that 20 million or 250 million people have actually seen it. I prefer to look at a different metric like engagement. So how many people have acted upon it? Have they liked it, they shared it, they favorited, they retweeted, they put a comment upon it? Those are the kind of metrics I find more important than reach, or God forbid, AVE or PR value, which you should never go near. So understanding the analytics that come with it, I'd be interested to know. I'd be interested to understand whether there's a different way of classifying and grouping different tiers of media based on what's important to me. Because I would want to put an overlay saying, well, you've got all these different media, but these are the ones I really prioritize. I'd want to know whether I could put alerts on it if any of these things happen. So those are the kind of areas I'd be more interested in understanding. But again, the main thing that concerns me there, Eric, is that you're just saying if you're just interested in news, my counsel to clients would be, don't just be interested in news, because your audience doesn't operate in, well, I only look at news or I only look at social. They look at it all together, and you want to see how it interrelates together.
Do you have like a standard RFP that you've put together that sort of, encapsulates a lot of the thinking that you're sharing with us here that you use when you're shopping?
Being the analyst that I am, I have quite a complex standard RFP, unfortunately. It combines feature functionality with use case. So in my typical grid, I've got all the different features I want. and then I weight them according to my use case. So some things are cool to have, but I may only use it rarely. So even if it can do it fantastically, but it's only a little part of what I need, it scores low. Whereas some areas are super important, I would overly weigh it. So I do have quite a complex RFP, but that just gets past round one. Round two is around the partnership. And I think a lot of people don't understand the value of that partnership with the accounting. Because what I often like to see is, how can I get more out of the tool? How can I get more out of this technology? How are other people using it? Or, I'd love it if this tool could do this. Have you considered developing in this direction? If I'm just another small person asking or signing up and I've got no say, but if I'm a partner with that vendor, then we can co-develop and co-create together and we all succeed.
In a recent Muckrack report, measuring business impact and lack of quantifiable metrics were the top two challenges PR people cited. Again, measuring business impact and lack of quantifiable metrics. Are there any tips you can give PR people listening to this webinar about how to measure the business impact of PR?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, let's say what you can't do. Business impact are not outputs. They're not, we had 14 interviews. They're not, we got in 15 media outlets. Those aren't business impact. So let's get rid of that. Secondly, get rid of vanity metrics like impressions. We hit 14 billion people. Third, get rid of nonsense metrics like advertising value equivalent or PR value. Now, we've got rid of all the bad things. Let's focus on the good things. We need to go from outputs to outcomes. And for that, I would recommend measuring the customer journey. Set your benchmark about where we were. If we knew our problem area was in consideration, and we've gone from 14 points to 24 points, and we can see how that's impacted the rest of the customer journey, that shows a business outcome, shows an impact. We can look at proxies to determine success. So don't just go for the easy metrics, because the goal for one campaign, if it's awareness, it may be around impressions. But if it's around purchase intent, I'm going to be using other metrics. If it's around advocacy, I may be looking at the number of 4-star reviews and above on Amazon. So, or trusted reviews. So there's different metrics that you would use to portray business impact. But it all depends on where you need to focus your activities within the customer journey.
And what about the lack of quantifiable metrics? Is that the wrong thing to be looking for?
Well, I've got around 600 quantifiable metrics that we use all the time. Now, for those of you who are making notes, there's plenty of tools out there that can give you loads of quantifiable business metrics, even if your client can't give you them themselves. For example, you can use a tool like Moz, which I talked about before, to find out how many people have visited a company's website over the past month. Well, that's a business metric. So there's lots of things out there beyond that example I've just given you now to show us a proxy business outcomes.
On the SEO side, Moz, Ahrefs, or SEMrush? You have a favorite?
Well, they're all pretty good. I mean, Moz is the cheapest, but does a basic good job. There's the metrics that are important for me to count are click-through rates. I think one of the most valuable ones. I like to have a look at how often the key search terms come up. So, provided you are consistent in how you apply those metrics across your competitors, it doesn't really matter.
Well, I have to say, with all due respect to all past guests on PR Tech Wednesdays, this has been a bombshell of a show. Thank you so much. I think just incredible value in this webinar. For those of you who've been listening, you'll receive a link with the replay shortly after this call. So feel free to share it with whoever you like. All are welcome at PR Tech Wednesdays. Join us next Wednesday for a conversation with Ben Choder. He's the president of West Digital Media, now Intrado Digital Media, which is a new full-stack PR enablement platform that launched at the PRSA International Conference in San Diego, and it takes a sort of logical workflow process-oriented approach to automating PR tech. So join us next week for the conversation with him about his new offering and its unique product features. And to Jonny Bentwood, thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you for inviting me.
This is Eric Schwartzman with PR Tech Wednesdays, signing out.